Good morning. Genesis 21 is where we will be today. And I'd mentioned, and I was just talking to somebody about it, that kind of set me to thinking about it again, that I'd said we were going to kind of finish up Abraham, and we're, of course, giving a lot of time to Abraham in our biography study. And then I was going to take a little bit of an interlude and deal with a couple of things that had arisen in the context of Abraham. One is to come back and revisit the subject of baptism and circumcision. And then the other is to deal, and this is, there are more questions than this is covering, but kind of the way that Abraham, and specifically the Abrahamic covenant, how people think about them with reference to future events in the church. So we're in chapter 21, which is going to be our portion this morning. Next week we will be in chapter 22. I'm just trying to give you some idea about the chronology. Abraham dies in chapter 25. So potentially a few more weeks, and then probably I'll deal with the circumcision and baptism first, because that's the easy one. Meanwhile, praying feverishly for the rapture. And absent that, we will tackle the fun one of the Abrahamic covenant and the church and some of those kind of dynamics. So, all right, let's pray. Our Father, we thank you for who you are and for revealing your faithfulness and your desires to us through your interaction with so many other people, and we thank you for their lives and their testimony, that it is helpful and encouragement to us. Pray for us that you would help us to be a people strong in our own faith, relying upon you, seeing your hand at work in our lives. And I pray this for us in Jesus' name. Amen. So chapter 21 really it has as its primary focus the birth of Isaac, the long-awaited child of promise. And yet Abraham is, of course, an instrumental figure there. And I'm just kind of, right, I'm not trying to defend because I don't know that I've been criticized, but think through my logic. It would have been very easy to just kind of take one Sunday and deal with Abraham's high points. But I think that it's helpful for us to look at his life in a little more detail. So there are, in what to us is chapter 1, there are 3 distinct episodes that are taking place, and we will look at them in that way. The first one is verses 1 through 8, which describes the birth of Isaac. The Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bare Abraham a son in his old age at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abraham called the name of his son that was born unto him, whom Sarah bare to him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac, being 8 days old, as God had commanded him. And Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born unto him. And Sarah said, God hath made me to laugh, so that all that hear will laugh with me. And she said, who would have said unto Abraham that Sarah should have given children suck? For I have borne him a son in his old age. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to roll verse number 8 into the next section. So the first major episode in chapter 21 is the long-awaited fulfillment of this promise. And you'll notice, folks, that in verses 1 and 2, we are told this, right? The emphasis is laid right out there for us so that we get it in no uncertain terms. And I would suggest that we read those 2 verses in light of all the time that has passed between the giving of the promise and all the events that have happened in light of the giving of the promise, and the wondering if the promise was actually going to happen, and thinking that perhaps they had some role in fulfilling it, that at long last the Lord visited Sarah as he had said. The Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived, bare Abraham a son in his old age at the set time of which God had spoken to him. So we're reminded 3 times in 2 verses that God did exactly what he said he was going to do. So the birth of Isaac is, first of all, a reminder of the faithfulness of God's promise. This is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to do. And God did it. But it is also, since Abraham, right, we're trying to follow the trajectory of Abraham, it is also a demonstration of Abraham's faith, in that Abraham follows through on things that are instructions God has given him. He named the boy Isaac, which in Genesis 17:19 God had told him to do. You're going to have a son, right? Everybody's laughing about this, so I think that's a fitting name for the child. Let's call him Laughter. And then he circumcised the boy on the 8th day, another evidence of obedience going back to Genesis chapter 17, verses 10 through 14. And Sarah herself in verse 6 and 7, right, celebrate the faithfulness of God. So that the faithfulness of God is a cause of joy to his people. We can count on him. We can rely upon him. That brings us to the second episode in the chapter, which are verses 8 through 21. And the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast the same day that Isaac was weaned. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, which she had borne unto Abraham, mocking. Wherefore she said unto Abraham, Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac. And the thing was very grievous in Abraham's sight because of his son. And God said unto Abraham, Let it not be grievous in thy sight because of the lad, and because of thy bondwoman. In all that Sarah hath said unto thee, hearken unto her voice, for in Isaac shall thy seed be called. And also of the son of the bondwoman will I make a great nation, because he is thy seed. And Abraham rose up early in the morning, took bread, a bottle of water, gave it unto Hagar, putting it on her shoulder and the child, and sent her away, and she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. And the water was spent in the bottle, and she cast the child under one of the shrubs. And she went and sat her down over against him, a good way off, as it were a bowshot. For she said, Let me not see the death of the child. And she sat over against him, and lift up her voice, and wept. And God heard the voice of the lad. And the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven, and said unto her, What aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is. Arise, lift up the lad, hold him in thine hand, for I will make him a great nation. And God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the bottle with water, and gave the lad drink. And God was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness, and became an archer. And he dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took him a wife out of the land of Egypt. So the first episode, of course, is the birth of Isaac, and the second episode in the chapter is the eviction of Ishmael. And so there is this conflict between, there had been conflict between Sarah and Hagar, and now there is conflict between Sarah and Hagar's son. And the word mocking in verse number 9, when Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, which she had borne unto Abraham, mocking, good translation, I don't mean any criticism of the translation, but it is also the Hebrew word laughing. So there's all kinds of laughter that attends to the life of Isaac, right? There is the laughter of God fulfilling his promise unexpectedly, and then there is this laughter that comes to Isaac for whatever reason. And we're not exactly told the reason why he was mocked. And, I'm sure that we could employ our tremendously psychological mindsets to put everything that there is to it. One of the things we're going to have to, and I don't have a great answer for it, but it's just one of those things that poses some problems to us in the text, is that Ishmael is not, he is young, but he is not that young. He is a teenage boy. He is at least 14, and realistically he's older than that because he's got to be 14 just by simple virtue of the calendar, and then however long it took for Isaac to be weaned, which it was not uncommon in his world for that to be the age of 2 or 3. So we're dealing with a teenage boy. I mean, let's be realistic, folks. A teenage boy mocking his toddler brother is hardly news. I mean, this doesn't really fall into the category of unusual conduct, but this certainly is. And, yes, sir.
Well, part of it wouldn't be the historical fact that the eldest inherited everything.
Yes.
So look at this younger, hey.
Well, yes, it is absolutely true, and this comes up in the Bible quite a bit. That, right, in their world, the oldest male got everything; it all belonged to him. And this is going to be one of those places where that is not true. And another thing that goes along with that in the Bible is that is frequently not well received by the older child. To find out that they're going to be reduced to second place. So this is right. So again, this is not. I want to be careful how I put this. It is a normal family in the sense that they are normal human beings living out their normal lives. They are an abnormal family in the sense that their lives have a significant role to play with reference to all of God's people. We will, of course, come back to this. We know where this conflict is going and where it originates and how God is going to deal with it. So this is not should not be assumed, and I don't think that we would. This is not the normal sibling rivalry kind of interaction of, my 3-year-old or my 2-year-old brothers just, however you want to define him. This conflict then becomes between Ishmael and Isaac becomes a real problem for Sarah. And again, there's all the normal motherly instincts that come into this. No mother is going to respond well to her child being victimized by somebody. But again, I think that perhaps there's a little bit even more to it on Sarah's end. So verse number 9, Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, which she had borne unto Abraham, mocking. Wherefore she said unto Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac. And this is a very strong conflict and a very strong word. That word cast out is a very, very, very strong word. In Genesis 3:24, it is the word used to describe God driving Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. They're expelled. It is in Genesis 4:14 one of the accusations that Cain raises against God himself. You have driven me out this day. So this is an expulsion. Exodus 6:1. Pharaoh will drive them out of his land. Right? So this is a, however it's going to play out, this is a strong deliverance or a strong deliberate act. And then you get to verse number 11, and this laughing between Ishmael and Isaac that inflames Sarah becomes a real crisis for Abraham. And it really, I mean, if you've kind of noticed this, folks, as in all of the conversation, or all, not the conversations, but the times there have been conversations, and in all of the interaction between God and Abraham, Abraham's emotional considerations in all of these things has been rather muted. Right? Genesis 11, the Lord had said unto Abraham, get thee out of thy country and thy father's house unto a land that I will show thee. And he went. And there's nothing about Abraham going, what? Who are you? What do you mean? There's none of that. But here in verse number 11, the thing was very grievous in Abraham's sight because of his son. And that again is another very strong word. We find it elsewhere in Genesis 19:9 when the inhabitants of Sodom pressed sore upon Lot as they attempted to break down the door to his house. So this really weighed upon Abraham that he's got this scenario and his wife is insisting that Ishmael be expelled because she is not going to have Isaac have to put up with that. And then in verses 12 and 13, it is such a conflict that the Lord intervenes. And again, I don't want to say this is unusual, but there have been other places in the life of Abraham where we would have welcomed an intervention from the Lord, like when he's down in Egypt or in Genesis 16 when they're concocting this plan to fulfill the promise through their own physical bodies. And God said unto Abraham, let it not be grievous in thy sight because of the lad and because of thy bondwoman. In all that Sarah hath said unto thee, hearken unto her voice, for in Isaac shall thy seed be called. And also the son of the bondwoman will I make a nation, because he is thy seed. So Abraham is really broken about this, verse number 11. And God is explaining to him that his brokenness is unwarranted a bad word? It's certainly, all right, we'll kind of come back to this, folks, because we tend to let these kind of grievances, these kinds of burdens, become the ultimate deciding factors for our decisions, don't we? That we feel almost pressed to make a decision in reaction to the burden. And if Abraham had simply made a decision in reaction to the burden, he might not have kicked Ishmael out. And God comes to him and says, no, you need to listen to your wife. You need to listen to your wife. And he'll be okay. I'm going to make him a great nation. Which again, to turn the spotlight a little bit back onto the life of Abraham, this man of great faith, verse number 14 reflects the response of his obedient faith. Abraham rose up early in the morning, took bread, a bottle of water, gave it unto Hagar, putting it on her shoulder. And the child, which, by the way, because the commentators go down this road and spend pages talking about this, it doesn't necessarily mean that he put the child on her shoulder. She's a teenage boy. And she departed and sent her away, and she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Bathsheba. So in the face of this great emotional agony, Abraham, the faithful man's response, is the response instructed by the word of the Lord, if you want to put it, right? Rather than, right, I'm going to make this application, rather than let his feelings dictate his behavior, he let the Bible dictate his behavior, which is where we are supposed to be, which is how we are supposed to live. And verses 15 through 21 then go on to tell us about what happens to Ishmael, what does ultimately become of this boy. And Ishmael, I haven't thought this far ahead in the series. I mean, we might spend some time on Ishmael. Although he is never portrayed as a believer, he is certainly an important figure in the biblical text. He is significant in his own right. And so verses 15 through 21 tell us about what happened. And we have an incident similar to that when Hagar is driven away by Sarah at the very beginning, that, right, she is sent off into the wilderness and she has this interaction with God. And I'm just going to mention, right, because here's kind of a textual dilemma that we have to sort through. Verse number 15, the water was spent in the bottle and she cast the child under one of the shrubs. That's the kind of language we would expect if she was dealing with a toddler or an infant. But again, he's not. I mean, we're able to do the math easily enough to have a 14-year-old boy in our hand at the minimum. So, did she wield her authority over him and put him under the bush? Yes. Did she pick him up bodily and throw him under the bush? I don't think so. But, right, they're out of water. They're out in the middle of the wilderness. Hagar, once again, has come to the conclusion that death is imminent, that there is nothing else for her. And God hears him and responds to her, "Thou, have I seen the God who sees me?" Ishmael. And God assures her of his plans. And then, again, this is not distressing, this is typical biblical information giving. Right? Verses 15 through 21 telescope us out many years into the future of Ishmael without telescoping the entirety of the story out into that many years in the future. Right? We're dealing with a 14 to 16-year-old boy. And God is telling us what's going to happen to this boy. So what is going to happen to this boy? God is again going to intervene in the life of this child to preserve his life, which poses, by the way, all kinds of interesting theological conundrums of its own, in that while God would be pleased for everybody to be saved, Paul says that, God is also pleased to have a world populated with lost people, and Ishmael is the testimony to that. I'm going to make a great nation out of him. And so you have in verse number 20, and God was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness and became an archer. Right? He grew comfortable in that kind of an environment. And he dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, which is down in the southern part of the Promised Land. And his mother took him a wife from the land of Egypt. Which really comes as no great shock because if you recall from chapter 16, Hagar is an Egyptian. But the line is, and we'll look at this in a little bit, right? The line is drawn clearly between Isaac and Ishmael, and it's not just a we have different mothers line. It is a we are two completely different people kind of line. And there really isn't any reason for you to notice this, but as I worked through it, I just found this fascinating. Ishmael is referred to in verse 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20, and is never called by name. He's never called by name. You say, well, what does that mean? I have no idea. But he is the son, the lad, the child, but never Ishmael. That brings us to the third episode. So the first episode is the birth of Isaac, and the second episode is the eviction of Ishmael. In the third episode, verses 22 through 34, is the covenant with Abimelech. And it came to pass at that time that Abimelech and Phicol, the chief captain of his host, spake unto Abraham, saying, God is with thee in all that thou doest. Now therefore swear unto me here by God that thou wilt not deal falsely with me, nor with my son, nor with my son's son. But according to the kindness that I have done unto thee, thou shalt do unto me and to the land wherein thou hast sojourned. And Abraham said, I will swear. And Abraham reproved Abimelech because of a well of water which Abimelech's servants had violently taken away. And Abimelech said, I wot not who hath done this thing, neither didst thou tell me, neither yet heard I of it, but today. And Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them unto Abimelech, and both of them made a covenant. And Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock by themselves. And Abimelech said unto Abraham, What meaneth these 7 ewe lambs which thou hast set by themselves? And he said, For these 7 ewe lambs shalt thou take of my hand, that they may be a witness unto me, that I have digged this well. Wherefore he called that place Beersheba, because there they swear both of them. Thus they made a covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech rose up, and Phicol, the chief captain of his host, and they returned into the land of the Philistines. And Abraham planted a grove in Beersheba, and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned in the Philistines' land many days. So we have thirdly a covenant with Abimelech, who is himself another significant Bible figure. He shows up with what we might call his chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, his leading military advisor. And he notes in verse number 22 Abraham's power. And he seeks a treaty of peace with Abraham. Verses 21 or verse number 23. And Abraham is agreeable, but he complains to Abimelech about a conflict over a well. And Abimelech, of course, as we read in verse number 26, denies any knowledge. And again, I just mentioned this for your general information. When you go to the commentators, there's a great division of opinion over whether or not Abimelech is telling the truth. I personally think that he is, because I think Abimelech has come already to the conclusion that Abraham is not a man to trifle with, that it would be completely counterproductive to Abimelech to be telling Abraham a lie about that. But again, we understand the world of politics and the world of plausible deniability. Yeah, go ahead and do it. Don't tell me about it, so I don't have to pretend that I knew about it. But I just really don't. I don't think that it's that sophisticated. There are a number of times, and again, we will come back to this. In fact, I think that this is one of the reasons that the story is told us. They go through in verse number 27 the formalized process of making a treaty, which, again, in the Old Testament is not making a treaty. It really is the process of cutting a treaty. Animals were divided, and the parties would bind themselves by walking in between the two halves of the carcasses. And Abraham makes a gift of these 7 lamb or 7 sheep, testimony to the fact that he himself dug the well and that the well is his, that the ownership belongs to him. Right? So that, right? Abraham is functioning very wisely so that there will be no future conflict about the well, because the whole thing started in conflict. And so, right? And so they end up calling the well Beersheba, the well of the oath. Both parties affirm the covenant, and Abraham returns to the land and establishes himself in Philistine land. I think really that's the point of verse number 33, that he planted a grove. Right, is that there's an intention for this to be a long-term settlement. Right, he plans to be there a while, and it tells us that he dwelt in the land of the Philistines many days. But he does not intend to dwell there as a Philistine, but as a worshiper of Jehovah. And so we are informed that he built an altar, and he called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And I think, right, because one of the questions that we ask is, why are we being told about this covenant and this well? What does it have to do with anything? And of course, the well at Beersheba becomes an important not just important for its water, it becomes an important geographical marker with reference to the nation of Israel, right? This is kind of like Abraham digging a well in Los Angeles. And they called the name of the well Los Angeles. It functions as a significant boundary marker as well. And so the Israelites will refer to their country north to south as Dan to Beersheba. But I also think that Abraham here is doing this in preparation for the future of his son. And again, without turning it into any kind of psychological profiling, there are a number of steps that Abraham and Sarah take that pave the way for Isaac in a way that their lives were not paved. I'm not saying that's a bad thing or a good thing, I'm just saying that it's a thing. Abraham was the original pilgrim to the land. Isaac is going to be a pilgrim in the land, but not to the very same extent. And so Abimelech wants a perpetual covenant of peace with Abraham, and Abraham calls on the Lord, the everlasting God, and establishes himself in the land. All right? So just several notes that I have about the text in general, and then, yes, sir?
Just a question regarding this oath between them, that it was supposed to be for Abraham, his son, and his grandson, so a long-term.
It's a long-term contract.
But then when we go to Genesis 26, Abimelech's guys have stopped up all the wells.
They've stopped.
So they violated all the treaty, didn't they?
Yes, they violated the long-term treaty.
Is there any significance to that in this portion? Or? It seems to be that Abraham's obligated, but it doesn't appear that Abimelech seems to be obligated. I don't know.
Well, I think the question is going to be, I'm not trying to let Abimelech off the hook, but just how much responsibility does he bear, can he bear for what the people in his land do, right? Is a man who's oversight of the entire region, is he going to be brought up to date on that well conflict? And he's obviously going to become a part of it at some point in time.
Kind of like the Crusades. Christians are always blamed for something that happened 1,000 years ago, but Islam, they can go and slaughter people left and right, and it's not a big deal.
Well, I think the other thing, though, Paul, and right, is that living in a hostile land, there's always going to be hostility. And, the other part of that, the New Testament is very clear with that. Right? You have raised this point. In fact, I think that you have dealt with it in a public message, how seriously God takes our commitments. The world, on the other hand, does not take their commitments very seriously at all. Right? As a characteristic of law. Look, folks, now I'm really going off topic, but the tragedy of this entire student loan debacle is not the millions, billions of dollars that are at stake. It is a generation of young people who think so little of their commitments that they're just willing to go, not my problem. This is, right? These people are going to take that mentality into their mature adulthood. If it doesn't change, everything is in jeopardy when people are unethical and dishonest in their commitments. So yeah, Paul, I don't know exactly how we'll track that yet. Quite honestly, I haven't worked that far ahead into the life of Isaac, and it's going to be a little bit before we get there. But Isaac is going to have to come back and revisit this same issue, the wells at Beersheba, and dealing with the Philistines. I turn, if you would please, to Galatians chapter number 4, because it is here where God explains to us his logic in telling Abraham to listen to his wife in this matter. One of the takeaways from a passage like Genesis chapter 1 is to remind us that God's people really are a supernaturally born people. We are normal people. We have physical parents. We didn't float down from heaven one day, but our spiritual being is a supernatural being and a supernatural birth. We've been dealing with this in the Gospel of John. We are not born of any physical, we're not born spiritually of any physical dimension. Not of blood, not of genealogy, not of lineage, not of ancestry. We are not born through the process of external mechanical religious purposes like baptism or circumcision or church membership. We are born again from on high. So our spiritual life exists in defiance of the laws of nature and physics. That's true Old Testament and New Testament. And this is what God is getting at when Sarah goes, you got to kick this boy out, and Abraham is broken about it, and God comes to him and goes, you got to kick this boy out. Because there is no room spiritually, there is no possible way for Isaac and Ishmael to live in harmony. And that's what I say to this extent, folks. How far to read into it, I don't know. But I think the text of Galatians makes very clear that Ishmael's mocking of Isaac is more than a teenage boy finding his toddler brother amusing or even stupid. Right? I mean, we have 3 kids. We have 6 grandsons. Every grandson, is one grandson in each family is an older brother and a younger brother. It's the brothers get along well, but the brothers get along well, asterisk, the way brothers get along, which is sometimes not in the nicest of ways. But there's much more to that than is being mentioned here. Galatians chapter 4 and verse number 21. Whereas I think, and I may have to come back and amend this, and you may, whereas Esau, with reference to his twin brother Jacob, will function to represent to us simply lost and saved, God uses Ishmael to represent not just simply lostness, but the law. And that's the context here, Galatians chapter 4. Let's start in verse number 19. And of course, the entire framework, Galatians is one of Paul's most aggressive books. He kind of opens it with his fists in the air, ready to go to war, because he perceives the threat that this group of churches has brought to the gospel by wanting to return people to the practice of the Old Testament law. Not that he doesn't have a great heart for them, which is where verse number 19 comes in. My little children, of whom I travail in birth again, until Christ be formed in you. So he sees this problem, right? This legalistic problem. He sees it as a characteristic of spiritual immaturity. Not, right? We're not having an argument here about rightness. We're having a conflict that is anchored in spiritual immaturity. I travail until Christ be formed in you. I desire to be present with you now and to change my voice, for I stand in doubt of you. Tell me, ye that desire to be under the law, do ye not hear the law? For it is written that Abraham had 2 sons, the one by a bondmaid and the other by a free woman. But he who was of the bondwoman was born after the flesh, but he of the free woman was by promise, which things are an allegory. An allegory, of course, is using human beings to teach spiritual truth. Which things are an allegory, for these are the 2 covenants. The one from the Mount Sinai, which gendereth to bondage, which is Agar or Hagar. For this Agar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and answereth to Jerusalem, which now is, and is in bondage with her children. But Jerusalem, which is above, is free, which is the mother of us all. For it is written, Rejoice, thou barren that bearest not. Break forth and cry, thou that travailest not. For the desolate hath many more children than she which hath an husband. Now we, brethren, as Isaac was, are the children of promise. But as then he that was born after the flesh persecuted him that was born after the Spirit, even so it is now. Nevertheless, what saith the Scripture? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with the son of the free woman. And I didn't go back and read the verse, but God assures Abraham back in Genesis chapter 21 that although he will bless Ishmael and make him a great nation, Isaac is the child of promise, and all the promises go to him. They're his promises. They're not going to share the promises. Verse number 31, So then, brethren, we are not children of the bondwoman, but of the free. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. And of course, I realize, folks, like you do, that differing opinions among God's people on different practices is often referred to as legalism. But that is not the subject matter Paul is talking about. He is talking about returning saved people to the practice of the law of Moses as a means to fulfilling spiritual maturity. So that you are saved by grace and you are mature by keeping the law. And I would point out, right, that imposing rules and regulations on people may at times be necessary. It is sometimes necessary at an institutional level. That by itself is not a good method of spiritual maturity. Spiritual maturity is the work of Christ, as is salvation the work of Christ. And so the child is to be cast out. And Paul here is drawing a very thick and broad line. He is not tackling issues over which we would separate in the name of liberty or in the name of legalism. But you'll notice from the way he puts it in verse number 21 that he is referring to the practice of putting people back under the law. So anyway, God's people are a supernatural people, right? And we are supernaturally born. We are supernaturally sustained. It is possible to grow in grace and in knowledge, but the law is not the avenue for that. The observation of feast days and circumcisions and the observations of Sabbath days and dietary restrictions are not. Again, some people practice those things, but they are not the methodology to spiritual maturity. They just simply cannot be. Secondly, the passage points out to us that God's people are responsive people. We see both obedience and worship on the part of Abraham and Sarah. In response to the faithfulness of God, this is how we are supposed to conduct ourselves. And we see that it is sometimes painful to be one of God's people and to make the decisions that he has for us. The text, again, is very careful to point out the agony of soul that Abraham experienced at the prospect of having to expel this son, and yet it did have to happen. So that's what I have. Questions, comments, notes, observations, criticisms, critique? We'll be back at 11 o'clock.